But I think that it's time to move on to our next speaker, and this topic is really, really important, and this session will be really useful. I work with the upcoming talents, and I must say that I was really happy when I saw our team of speakers, since we have a lots of diversity in here. And since the representation matters so much to my talents, it's really nice to have that your community is also really diverse and inclusive. But Melissa comes to talk about the topic why a diverse team is crucial to startup success. Team diversity refers to differences between members of startup team. Those differences can include demographic differences like age, race, sex, ethnicity, personality like extrovert, introvert, and differing Myers-Briggs types, and functional as in skill sets like engineering, design, copywriting, and marketing. How does this team diversity impact your customers' experience from the moment they learn about you through their journey with you? You will attract and relate to customers who look like you. They will understand your messaging and you will understand their needs. If you don't represent the right dimension of diversity, you are leaving an amazing experience behind. Melissa has worked in a tech industry over 20 years in roles ranging from junior software engineering to her current role as the Chief Customer Experience Officer at Adaptation. Melissa, it's your turn.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me here. I'm really excited to bring diversity as a topic to you guys. So it's great to see the diverse speakers that you've had at the event so far for the last couple of days. And I'm really excited to be able to share my own experience and maybe some tips and tricks about how to really get started with diversity if you're not there yet. So a little bit about me, as you know, the introduction mentioned, I've been a technologist for over 20 years, and I've had lots of different roles, both individual contributor and leadership roles. And what I've always noticed is, as a female in the tech industry, we're a bit of a minority. And I think that's why this topic has always been something that's, you know, very near and dear to my heart and something I'm passionate about and excited to bring some information to you today and inspire maybe some diversity of thought amongst the attendees. So you'll notice that I say crucial to startup success. That's partly because I work at a startup today. So Adaptation is a small startup here in the state of New Hampshire in the US. So I'm over on the northeast side of the US. So it's just about 9 a.m. here this morning. So it's really exciting to talk to people all around the world about this topic as well. Our startup, we really focus on actually customer experience and most specifically user experience. It so happens that our platform is built using Ruby, and we use Ruby to build amazing experiences for our customers on top of their enterprise CRM. So it's very related to the topics that you have been talking about, even from a technology perspective. So I thought it was really interesting, the intersection of what we do with technology and what you guys have been talking about for the last couple of days. So like I mentioned, I've been in the industry for quite a while. And as a female, I represent a diverse perspective that is unfortunately much more rare than I'd wish, especially all these years later. And I also co-founded an initiative called Diversify Thinking with a colleague of mine after years of, honestly, frustration, volunteering in the space of women in tech. There's a lot of branded organizations, initiatives, et cetera. And I did a lot of local, national, and then even global volunteering and speaking and mentoring in that space. And I think my biggest frustration point is we do a lot of creating these safe spaces and circles and communities. And I've been a part of creating a lot of those amazing things, and they're very necessary. Unfortunately, we don't have the same level of action according to that conversation. So my personal mission and the mission of Diversify Thinking, and why I'm bringing this topic to you today as the Chief Customer Experience Officer, even at a tech startup here in New Hampshire, is because I really feel strongly that we need to educate people about how to get started and give them the tools they need so that we can raise the level of action to meet the level of conversation. I think there's great conversations. This will be hopefully a beneficial one for all of you today. And like I said, I'm really excited to bring it to you, but I want to see some action come out of that. So I'm hoping I can inspire action in all of you. And even if it's one thing that you think differently about when you leave here today, I will feel as though I've been successful. So that's my mission today with you in the next few minutes. And I'm really open to any questions that you guys have about, my own experience or how you can move forward. And again, like, this is positioned for startup success, but I challenge you to think about it in your own context. You may not work at a startup. You may work at a large corporation right now. You may be freelancing or consulting. There's lots of different perspectives that you may be coming from, but I promise you there'll be nuggets in here that are very applicable to you, your context, and the people that are surrounding you, because it affects your customers. So even if you're a consultant, how you represent yourself and the people you work with affects your customer experience. Like mentioned in the introduction, it will be who you attract, and we'll get a little bit more into that. So I challenge you to think of, ignore the startup word here and just put success there, because regardless of your context, having a diverse team is crucial, just period, right? So I'm a firm believer in that, and I represent one aspect of diversity. So I can say, with experience, that it definitely adds value. So let's dive in. So now that I brought this topic to you, I think the most important first step, and where you have to start, is definition, right? So I'm a big believer in words matter. I think sometimes we neglect the fact that my definition of something is different than yours. So again, I kind of bring this challenge to you. If you had this maybe definition, predisposed notion of what diversity meant, and I'll tell you, quite frankly, the blanket diversity definition for most people is around race and gender. Like, in all the conversations I've had, conferences I've presented, and communities I've been a part of, that definitely is sort of the bias of society, is that the bias is focused around race and gender. Now, I'm not here to tell you that that's not real. It absolutely is. I happen to be on the gender side of that. But what I want to challenge and expose to you is diversity has many dimensions. It is not just gender and race. There are many dimensions. There's age, and we have experienced a lot of ageism in our society. And we look at like generational diversity as a topic, and a very interesting one that we don't talk about enough. So there's things like that. There's race, sure. There's religion. So many different dimensions, but you have to understand what's important to you. So a very large movement, I think, especially now given the pandemic and all the women that we've lost due to the pandemic and the roles that they had to play in their own household, making them step down from careers, both in tech and across many industries. I think what we are challenged by is that we see people pushing really hard for gender diversity. And I think I obviously fully support that for clear reasons. And that's great, but that's in their context, right? So you have to understand what's important to you and define that. And when I say define it, I literally mean write it down. Sit around with whoever is in your team, your corporation, your startup, whatever your context is, and sit down and write this down and understand what your goals are, because it will reflect what your definition of diversity is. There's a lot of organizations, both small and large, that put out some pretty lofty goals, which I support heavily, which is like get to gender equality by 2025. I've seen this a lot. There's whole initiatives around this. I think they're called like 50-50 by 2025. But again, those are really focused on gender. They don't even address race. So that could be a primarily white initiative. And that's a problem too. So I think we just have to be really careful. Now, that's not that that's bad. Again, I'm not saying don't just focus on gender. I want to make sure that you are clear, though, what is your definition of it up front. So this step is crucial for this whole process, because if you just dive in, you're going to miss out on some other benefits of diversity and those other dimensions. One of the things we mentioned was personality types and background. So where someone comes from, and someone that comes to tech that has journalism or marketing background, but is transitioning into tech, well, that's a pretty interesting dimension of diversity, right? So I think we just have to challenge ourselves on how we think, and define it and write it down. So that's your homework, step one. Whatever context you're in, you have to go back and assess your landscape, but also what does diversity mean to you? Because until you understand that, you won't really know, that's your destination. You won't know how to get there. So now you've defined it. You're very clear on what diversity means to you in your context. How and when do you start? And I term this diversity debt. Don't accrue it, which means you should have started yesterday, because you're already behind. And what that means is once you start to build a team or you're in a team, you already have some level of diversity debt if you haven't done the first step of defining what it is, right? And why it's important to you and what part of diversity you want to invest in. So you have to start right away. There's really no other way to do it, because you're already behind the 8 ball there, and you're incurring debt. And so the challenge there is, again, like defining it and then building that plan towards how you're going to achieve it and understanding your destination. And you have to just, dig in immediately, because that is how things change. And again, this is back to, what I said in the intro. Your action correlating to that definition is what really is going to matter and really move the needle for you. But where do you start? So I'm here to tell you that you start at the top. And sometimes that's challenging. In a startup, I'm really proud to say that in our leadership team, we are 75% diverse, which is pretty awesome and very rare. So there are a lot of women-founded companies. One of my co-founders is a woman, so that's amazing. Again, very focused on diversity, dimension of gender, being fully transparent there. But leadership matters. And the reason why diversifying leadership really matters is because that is the most visible part of your company. So if it's the most visible part of your company, think about what marketing efforts you might be investing in as a company. If the most visible part is the leadership team and your leadership team is not diverse, that's what you're leading with, quite literally. And you're leading in the public with that. So it definitely has an impact and influences your business as a whole. So if you start by making sure your leadership team is made up of diverse individuals from different backgrounds with different perspectives, again, based on your definition of diversity, but I challenge you to think not just in gender, and make sure they all feel supported to speak up on all issues regarding the business. Now you're really cultivating that leadership from the beginning and also from the top down, which matters for everything else I'm about to tell you. So that's, you've defined it, you need to start now. So what is it? When do I start? But how and where? And so I'm here to tell you that it's the leadership. And, there's, again, back to the gender dimension, a lot of talk about where's the pipeline of specifically women in tech, right? So that's where I'm the most familiar. So I'll speak from that perspective, and that the pipeline's dried up and we don't have anybody in the pipeline. And I like to challenge that, because I don't think there really is a pipeline problem. I actually, and I heard Melinda Gates say this on an interview actually a few years back, and I totally agree. There's a pathways problem, not a pipeline problem. Like the women or the diverse candidates, whatever that definition is, they're there, but we're not actively seeking them out. We're not making space for them, and we're not creating pathways for them to especially go into leadership. This is a big problem. And I have lots of ideas if you ever want to connect after about how to do that within any size organization. To cultivate that. But I think we have to stop leaning on this pipeline problem as it's kind of turning into an excuse. And so let's leave the excuse factory and really focus on, the pathways. What pathways are we building for maybe people that already exist in our context, like people that are already on our team or a team in our corporation, et cetera? Like, how can we create an avenue and navigate them towards a leadership role, so that we're not always saying it's a pipeline. It's just a fake excuse. There are definitely qualified diverse candidates, and they likely might be right under your nose. So I think obviously that takes time, and we'll get into the recruiting aspect of that. But, it is a time allocation problem. So once you define it and you understand when to start, you do have to dedicate time. And so I think there's not enough VCs and CEOs in general, or C-level executives really focused on this and dedicating the time to it. So it's easy to lean in on that pipeline problem to say, well, I just can't find any. But you have to put the work in, because you probably aren't going to find anybody if you're not actively seeking them out. So I think, again, back to a startup's perspective, the founder's main objective is to do what it takes to make their company successful. I think we wouldn't argue with that. And maybe a team leader or a C-level executive in any context, that's your definite job, is to dig in and do what needs to happen to make your company successful. So data shows that a diverse leadership team yields better business performance. So why wouldn't you diversify your leadership team? Like, we have data. I mean, there's McKinsey studies and countless studies. You can Google it, you will find them all. So we know this, it's been proven and documented and measured. So why wouldn't you start there? So I challenge all of you to think about that. Again, it's your most visible part of the company, and it's going to help you grow the business and make your business successful, which is your responsibility as a leader or a founder. So you're going to start at the top, and then from there, you're going to build teams. And of course, that's hiring and recruiting, but you can't stop there, and we'll get into why. But how do you even start with the hiring process? So our team at Adaptation, I'm really proud to say that we use our own definition of the Rooney Rule. So please look up at that. It really talks about like getting to 50% of a diverse candidate pool. Again, based on your definition of diversity, going back to the, our beginning of the talk, what does it mean to you, and how do you get to 50% by the second round? And again, like, it's because I'm making a concerted effort as someone that's in the recruiting process of candidates, making sure that they are diverse initially, and that I'm not weeding out all the diversity from the first round. I'm happy to say that our head of people ops does an amazing job. I just had some interviews that we ran about a month ago, and I talked to 5 candidates in 2 days, and not one of them was a mirror image of any of the others. So amazing job, but that takes time. Like, she had, I think, probably 30 to 40 conversations to bring me those 5. So it is definitely work, and there's definitely investment. So I'm not going to tell you it's easy, but I will tell you it's hugely valuable on the other side. And so I'm really proud of what we're doing here. And I think that there's a way to do it. Again, it takes time and you have to invest, but there's a way to do it that allows the diversity to come to you. And part of that is looking at how you post job descriptions. We actually try to keep our job descriptions pretty light. Part of that is because we're a startup, and sometimes roles shift and evolve. So we're careful not to put too much onus in the initial stages on the definition of what we're looking for, because we know the type of person and we know the skill sets, but what they are actually doing in our context may shift as we grow, and as we experiment and try out strategies with different markets. And so, but your job descriptions matter. And so there's a lot of tools that you can use. This is just one that we use to check, basically decode for gender. Again, this is very specific to gender, but there are other tools that will also detect other biases in your job description. So this is one that we use here, Gender Decoder. And really for us, it's a quick way to check whether the job advertisement has any kind of subtle linguistic gender coding that would put a woman off from applying. So, and as a woman, I can tell you this is real. And there's been studies that have been done with this as well. So when there is a job posting out there, as a woman, we read this, and if we don't check 10 out of 10 job responsibilities and we can't say we've done all of those things, we actually will not apply to it. So if any of you are doing recruiting or have experienced this, I can't see all of your faces. Hopefully someone's nodding, but this is real. And I have felt it myself, but a man will look at a job description, and if there's 10 things that are required of that particular role, if they've done 1 of 10, they're like, I got this, and they'll apply. Now, why is that? There's all kinds of studies around, why that bias exists in us as individuals, as females. But you need to know that and go into it with your eyes open. Otherwise, you're going to lose out on the diverse candidates when they just read the job description. So we've had a lot of luck with this particular Gender Decoder. And it's interesting because we thought we were being, and again, I mentioned that my head of people ops is amazing, right? She's really, really focused on diversity. And even when she ran the job descriptions, which are really minimal, through our Gender Decoder here, we found masculine language. And it was really surprising and almost interesting to learn some of the language you use every day is considered and slanted towards like masculinity. So it's really educational to do that. And I would actually say you could look at a job description if you're out there right now looking for a job and run it through one of these decoders and look at it for yourself and be like, if you're a woman right now in our session, or someone of any diverse background, and you're looking at a job and you're questioning your role in that job, like, could I do this? Or, you have any self-doubt, maybe run it through this gender decoder or another decoder if you find one for other diverse dimensions. And then ask yourself, am I actually feeling this self-doubt because of the language that's used in this job description? Or do I actually feel I'm not qualified? I think it would be really educational and maybe inspirational in some aspects and empowering for you to do that. But absolutely, as someone that's responsible for recruiting, or if you are working on a team and you're thinking about growing the team, whoever is responsible, please bring this to them. Like, again, an action item for you to take away, share that the words matter. Again, like I said in the beginning, defining diversity matters because words matter in our definitions. We need to be aligned on what we're trying to achieve. The words in your job descriptions matter as well because they're appealing to humans. And what we read and what we see is how we interpret, and we need to be able to see ourselves doing that job. So depending on the words that you use, you may already be pushing me to self-select out of your diverse candidate pool. So you need to be careful about that. Again, like, look up the Rooney Rule. I know that we implemented our own version of that, where we focus on getting to like 50% in that second stage of interview. And I shared like how amazing we are doing there. And I'm really proud of that. The other key thing that I want to caution on, and this happens a lot in startups, but I think it happens across the board. I mean, I worked in a smaller company that was acquired into a very large global corporation in my last career. And this happened a lot there as well. We all know that the way you get jobs most times these days is through referrals, right? It's through who you know. I tell my mentees this all the time, like, build your network now before you need it, because that's how you're going to get your next opportunity. So it's no surprise that people get referred for jobs, right? I mean, this is what we see. The unfortunate side effect of referrals, and the problem with it is, who do you refer? People that people that are in your immediate circle. And let's face it, a lot of those people look like you, right? It's your friends and family. And this isn't across the board, like always the case, but there is bias there. And so if we allow that to drive our hiring, then we could end up with a pretty homogeneous group of people. And so this is, again, I see this a lot in small business and startups. Ours was no different, really. It was started with family and then essentially friends, and sort of grew beyond that. And now we're really taking diversity seriously, and we've employed investment and practices and a process. But without that, it's who you know, which is also important, but we need to be cautious about that. So I want to just kind of like wave the flag if you're starting to see that, the people sitting around the table look an awful lot like each other, it's probably partly through the sort of friends and family hiring process. So just be open about it, speak up, and make sure to recruit candidates outside of your network, it's interesting to say that because I believe that your network is supporting you to get your next role. But I then challenge you to diversify your network. Another thing that I tell my mentees, like, don't build your network based on your current role and your current context. Build your network for things that you aspire to do. So it's a little bit off topic here, but also something I'm very passionate about and would love to talk to anybody about it after this if they're interested. But, how you build your network obviously supports not only your next opportunity, but how diverse you will be brought into what environment. So really important. But we can't just focus on the recruiting side of things. It's obviously, very important. It takes investment, but we have to move beyond that too, because now once you've hired them, guess what? They're in your team, they're in your company. You don't want them to leave. So how are you going to keep them? So this is all about like focusing on inclusion, not just diversity. And there is a difference. And I think this is also much lost on the masses, much like diversity and all the dimensions of diversity, not just being gender and race. I think we forget what inclusion actually means. And, I've heard a lot of different analogies around it, but for me, it's like inviting someone to the table, but not giving them a voice. So I've recruited, I've got down to those 5 people in the interview. I'm like, awesome, this is amazing. I'm going to pick the most diverse candidate because, interestingly enough, a funny thing happens when underrepresented candidates make it into those final rounds of interviews. and we've seen this in our own context as well, they often actually prove to be the best candidate. So you might end up being surprised if you force them and make the issue happen, those people actually end up being the people you hire, which is amazing, right? Now we are building this foundational diverse team. Love it. It fosters innovation and creativity. But how do we keep them? Because inclusion is not just about unconscious bias. It's not just about understanding and appreciating and having your eyes open and being self-aware. It could be as simple as looking around the room and seeing that somebody is not talking and asking what they think, like really being curious. And I don't think that we, especially as leaders, and I put myself in this, I don't think we stay in the space of curiosity and being inquisitive enough. I think we really, really need to do that. So I challenge all of you to look around the room, the next meeting that you're in, the next Zoom, whether it's virtual or in person, depending on where you're at now, look around and be like, who's not talking? And it doesn't have to be a woman or, someone of a different race. Just in general, is the diversity of thought really being cultivated? That's inclusion, right? Diversity of thought is where inclusion comes from. And like, how are you making sure that everyone's being heard? So it's about embracing the uniqueness of every individual and inspiring the team. And so that they line up at the door and they want to belong to an organization that believes in them. And these are big goals. It's super inspirational, right? Like I love coming to work every day because I know that my opinion and my voice is heard and valued. That's inclusion. That's feeling like you belong, you're part of something. And I think that's the part, again, like we so focus on diversity in the metrics, like 50-50 by 2025. Well, what happens in 2026? Are we still 50-50? Or did we lose people? That attrition is directly related to how are you making them feel welcome and that they belong to the organization because you believe in them, because you're listening, because even it's not, and that's not about agreeing, right? I think there's this whole notion of disagree and commit, which means you get the voice, but your opinion and your perspective isn't always the right path, but we at least put all of that in a shared pool of knowledge and we evaluate it as a team. And that's really, inclusion really comes down to focusing on that and allowing all individuals to contribute fully to the organization's success. And I'm a firm believer in that anyways. I really operate independently in servant leadership. I believe as a leader, we are here to support and serve the team, not the other way around. I understand fully that that's not everyone's leadership style. And that's important too, by the way, the diversity of styles and personalities we talked about in the beginning, that definitely influences the culture. And I think you have to have those checks and balances. My co-leaders are not the same style as me. I'm a very coach, mentor type leader, and definitely that servant leadership role, but that's what makes me feel like I'm providing value. That's not everyone. But again, like some aspect of us all can lead from any chair. So I know some people will hear this talk and say, yeah, but I don't have control. I'm not a leader. I'm not in a leadership role. What could I possibly do? And you can lead from any chair. I promise you, if you're in a conversation, no matter what your role, even if you're not running the meeting, even if you're not in a director, VP, C-level role, depending on where you work, you have the power to be curious and invite challenge in that conversation. You should all feel empowered at any time to be able to raise your hand and say, like, Mary, I haven't heard you what your thoughts are here. So I really invite you to invite challenge and be curious in that space, because that's where inclusion is born. It really does come from spending the time to do that. So you've defined it. You know when to start. You know where to start. You know how to accomplish pulling together a team. And most importantly, how to create and cultivate an environment of inclusion to support your diverse candidates that you've hired. Now, how are you going to know how you're doing? So you have to measure these things. Like anything in business, you won't know if you're succeeding if you don't measure it. And this is also the next mistake that people make, quite honestly. Like they think they're killing it on the recruiting front, but they're not actually measuring. So they forget about the inclusion piece because they don't measure to see what's happening on the attrition side, like who's leaving the business. So do things like these. Sounds very simple, but make a list of your last 10 promotions. How diverse do you consider them in terms of gender, ethnicity, background, et cetera, depending on revisit your diversity definition and look at that. What are your last 10 promotions? Who were your last 10 hires? Are you really killing it in recruiting? Are you following your own practices and according to the definition that you said was important to you? If you haven't made enough recent promotions or hires, think about your last several, like all hands or company or team meetings, and whose efforts you've acknowledged, and think about the last raises and bonuses you've allocated. So again, this right here speaks really critically to something I'm very passionate about, which is pathways. So how are you creating those pathways? Think about that. Who are you providing opportunities to? Who is the last person that you gave a raise or a bonus to? Who have you acknowledged last? Are you distributing rewards and recognition in a way that acknowledges a wide-ranging set of contributions, right? Are you always giving an attaboy to the same person? Are you recognizing those unsung heroes, those people that sat at the table but didn't ask a question, right? Again, this goes back to like being curious and really reflection around how are you operating this business and who are you acknowledging? Think about the last 5 people to leave your organization. Do you notice any commonality in their circumstances or their background? Were they all the diverse candidates that you tried so hard to recruit at the beginning? That matters. Are there patterns that are being established every day in your organization, again, in whatever your context is, that you're not paying attention to, and so it is impacting the state of your team? These things matter, but you won't know if you don't reflect, you're not self-aware, you don't write it down. Just like the definition, write it down and look at it often. And as you see the patterns emerging, now you're going to get a better sense of where you started from, because remember, you have to measure at the beginning, and then monitoring how things are changing over time so that you know where things aren't working and you can adjust. This is not a one and done approach to diversity. There is no such thing. If you want a silver bullet, I'm here to tell you that it doesn't exist. This takes work. Like I mentioned, this is an investment, but it has tangible benefits for your business. Again, look up any McKinsey study around this, that they usually focus around gender diversity, but anything around diversity in business, you will find countless articles and studies that document the impact to the bottom line. It is very, very important for your business to be successful, which is what we all inevitably want, because even as an individual contributor, if the value you're contributing isn't contributing to the overall business success, then there's a risk there. There's a risk to you individually as part of that team, and there's a risk to the business. So this stuff really matters. Again, like I'm really pushing hard on like taking action leaving here to think about some of these questions around, again, even if you're not in a leadership role, who were the last 5 people to leave? Can you raise that to someone in a leadership role and challenge them to think about it and to think about it differently and create a plan to address those patterns? So we've talked about a lot, and I want to give a few minutes for questions, but I just want to kind of debrief on this. Define diversity and write it down. There's lots of dimensions. Figure out the ones that are most important to you. Maybe it is gender, and I obviously fully support that. But I challenge you to think more broad. And obviously part of that is knowing where you're at and what your starting point is going to really help you influence where do you want to go. So know where you're starting, you are here, and where you want to go, your destination. That's going to help you actually define what diversity means in your context. You need to start immediately. Otherwise, you're already behind. You're incurring debt as you add new team members or as team members leave that could be diverse. Again, that's debt too. And it's really hard to get that back. So start now. Start at the top. Your leadership team matters. It influences the direction of your business strategically. It influences the first faces that your customers see in the market that you're trying to attract. It influences the rest of the team you're trying to build. So it really matters. Start with recruiting, but you don't stop there. Try out some of the tools that we talked about today. Ask yourself when you look at roles, if you're right now out there looking for your next opportunity, how are those job descriptions and the bias there influencing or impacting your ability to apply individually, and kind of, reflect on that. And then, now once you've hired people and you've brought them to the table, give them a voice at the table. Be very curious, regardless of your role. You do not have to be in a leadership role by title to invite curiosity and challenge to the table. And this is, what I believe to be the most exciting part of having a diverse team, is really inviting that across the board. And then know your stats. Where are you at? Where are you going? What patterns are emerging, and how can you adjust? Because otherwise you will not be successful. So here's a link tree. If you want to get in touch with me, feel free to grab that. You'll find all the ways to reach me across, the Twitterverse, etc. Happy to talk more about this in the future. Obviously, I'm got some vested interest as a woman in the technology industry for over 2 decades, but also, just very passionate about the topic. I also just want to leave you with this thought. The reason why some people don't invest in this partly is because of awareness and not understanding some of what we talked about today, but also because it's hard, and a diverse team has tons of benefits. Again, like, you can Google and find this out yourself, like the benefits to the business and all the pros. There are cons. A diverse team is very difficult to manage at times. And why is that? Because it does invite conflict. When you put people together that are holistically different or come from different backgrounds, disciplines, personalities, race, culture, gender, etc., age, they challenge each other and it creates conflict. And from someone in a leadership role, I'm here to tell you that can create a lot of tension in that conflict, but out of conflict comes great innovation. And so we desperately need this across every industry, but definitely in technology. And then I'll pause for questions.
Thank you, Melissa. This was such an important topic. And yes, we have lots of comments and questions for you. Are you ready for those?
I am ready.
Yes. Let's start with the thanks. DJ commented in stream chat. Thank you, Melissa, for mentioning there's more to diversity than race and gender. And Peter commented, all the talks were excellent so far, but this is the one I needed the most in my current situation, hands down. Thank you so much.
Oh, amazing.
Yes. So let's go to the questions. When handling applications, do you use anonymous sorting so that the system leaves out the age, gender, pictures, etc., to avoid any biases and to make sure there is no discrimination or even subconscious choices?
Yeah, no, that's great. So what we do, and this is an interesting approach, and I think it works for us as a startup, we actually, our job descriptions are very minimal. So our applications that we actually get a diverse candidate pool for every job we post, partly because we sort of leave it open-ended, I think. So we don't have like really specific roles and responsibilities that we're looking for. So I'm not doing the recruiting specifically, but our head of people ops, when she's looking through those applications, she does ask, like what their preferred pronouns are and things like that. So she does get that information. But I don't believe she uses any sort of sorting mechanism. I think she really does screen almost every candidate, right? She does, like when I said I had 5, she was having probably 40 to 50 conversations to bring me that 5. So I don't think she's using an algorithm per se, but that's not to say that you couldn't do something like that. I have heard in other talks where they've actually recommended that you don't, once the applications come through, you actually don't disclose to the recruiter or the hiring managers in those rounds, the name or any information. You just disclose everything but who actually the identity of that person, which seems like mind-boggling. You're like, so I don't even know, but that does sort of, like, to the point of sorting, screen out discrimination up front. And so we're not doing that, but that's an interesting approach. And I have heard that people have done that in the past. Like, it's a blind review of like the resume.
Yeah. Is it possible that you could stop sharing your presentation so we probably would see your
absolutely.
face? I just noticed that. Yeah, now I can say hello. Nice to see you.
Yeah. No worries.
Now we can continue. Let's talk about age. I'm 45, and also I'm a woman, so I'm a little bit concerned. And there was also a question regarding of ageism. Is it really becoming a problem in the tech industry? How you see that?
Yeah, well, I'm also 45, and also a woman. So I am totally can relate. And And I do see that. I see really interesting. And I think, again, to my own current context, I see ageism a little bit in startups. I don't see women, and I don't see women of our age taking that risk. So I think part of that is like, how risk tolerant are we after we get, into our 40s and beyond? So I think that it's a reality. It's a real challenge. And that, it's interesting. We haven't, as a very small startup, we haven't actually explored what to do about it, but I definitely see it. Now, in my corporate career, I saw it maybe less because there's stability in that level of, jobs and like the size of the organization. So what I see right now is the age reflection is almost like we self-select out of certain opportunities, especially in tech, because we see ourselves as like, oh, that's way too risky. I'm going to go the safe route. So I'm an anomaly in that space, I think. And I've been told as much. Like, you're this far in your career, why would you dive into the startup world now?
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, so I do see it. And I think part of that too is having maybe people like me and you like leading the charge to show that like we can take that risk.
Yeah.
It's important because we need that diversity of thought too, right? In leadership and in the individual contributor world for even small companies, because we're losing out the fact that we don't have that. But yeah, I definitely see that as a problem.
Yeah, in Finland, we have also this discussion about the age because we have these vibrant young men startups a lot here, and older men are feeling that they are not good enough anymore. They are not young anymore. They are not that, they think they don't have any new ideas and stuff like that. So times are changing and we are changing all the time. So there are new discussions all the time raising up. So
yeah, absolutely.
But this is a really good topic about the startups. I know where I'm inviting you to talk next time. I have a perfect event for you. Let's go. We have a couple questions on here too. You mentioned that company you are working 75% diverse. The audience wanted to little bit clarify the definition of diversity so they understand this name 75%.
Oh, well, first of all, that means I was successful because now they're challenging me to say, well, what's your diversity definition?
Yes,
I love it.
Exactly.
So they were paying attention. So good on you guys. So yeah, when I said our leadership team was 75% diverse, it definitely was around gender. So we have a four-person leadership team and 3 women and 1 man. So it was specifically in gender, but we do have diversity across our entire team, and we're a small team, but we do have diversity that includes not just gender, but also race and background. So even like our head of people ops, and this is why I say diversity definitions matter. Our head of people ops actually comes from a social work role.
Yeah.
So she didn't have traditional HR experience or background, but certainly social work and engagement with people and that sort of empathetic role absolutely applies to people ops, right? So yeah, my 75% was definitely around the leadership and gender diversity.
Yeah, there's always this question about white males, do they belong to diversity? And as I see, of course, white males belong to diversity. There's no question about that.
Yeah,
I know
absolutely.
we are, let's go. I want to ask this one. I know the gender decoder is a familiar tool for me. I truly recommend it to everyone who works with the recruitment. But Melissa, do you have any good example of non-biased recruitment advertisement? Because the question maker says that having a list of useful skills in job postings is so common that I can't even think of another way to be explicit about what is important. I have something to say to this, but do you?
Yeah. I think, I have a lot to say. I think what I would say too is like, part of it is appealing to the right characteristic of person. I think sometimes we get really, honestly, like very, black and white on and off about like, we need these very specific skills or these, but what kind of person do you want to come to the table? Because that's where I see like diversity of thought that I would kept kind of chiming back to. So what kind of personality are you trying to attract? Like you want to write something in a job description that someone reads it and go, they relate, right? They're like, oh, that's me. Even if I don't have, like I mentioned, even if I don't have all 10 of the skills that you had in there, right? And we do that. We look at that. We're like, oh, I've never done that. Okay, I guess that's not for me, you know? So I think you want to write a job description in a way that's inspirational too, so that you understand the type of person, the personality that you're trying to attract.
Yeah. If you check the Gender Decoder webpage, there's this study from the year 2011, I think it was, and there was this talking about male-coded and female-coded words that might affect to the people who are applying the job. So maybe the question maker, this is your good chance to check out the words from the Gender Decoder page. But we need to move on. I'm so sorry. I would like to continue the discussion, and it's really nice to see that Ruby community is always supporting the important talks, and we can continue this discussion on Twitter and Discord and LinkedIn, and let's keep it up.